Is there a better time other than immediately upon waking to drink caffeine? Let's talk about it. So, I recorded an entire episode on what is referred to as the dawn effect. And this is simply your liver and your body giving you a cup of coffee every time you wake up in the morning. And what I mean by this is immediately when you wake up, you'll actually have the highest levels of cortisol, adrenaline, and blood glucose. And this is because throughout the night, you'll begin to slowly accumulate cortisol, glucagon, and adrenaline. And all of these hormones will actually work to increase the amount of blood glucose you have when you wake up by not only increasing the amount of glucose in the bloodstream by liberating it from storage, but also increasing the process of gluconeogenesis, where we are turning non glucose molecules like fat and protein into glucose. And if we take a look at the effects of caffeine, caffeine will increase our cortisol and adrenaline and will mobilize fuel like fat and glucose. It has the exact same effect as this dawn phenomenon. And now, when it occurs through the dawn phenomenon, all of these things are physiological and helpful. But you may have also heard how high adrenaline, high cortisol, and high blood glucose can actually be a problem. Therefore, adding in caffeine and simply just multiplying the effects of these molecules may actually be putting us in the state that most people are trying to avoid. Cortisol and adrenaline are going to increase our blood pressure and heart rate. And if we double down on this by ingesting caffeine, we'll have an extremely high heart rate and an extremely high blood pressure, and neither of these are ever promoted as being beneficial, especially if our next step is to sit down in a chair for work. We'll also double down on the amount of fat and glucose that we liberate into the bloodstream, so we'll have high blood glucose and high blood triglycerides, both of which are surrogate markers for poor metabolic health. Additionally, because we have such high cortisol and adrenaline, we'll may actually begin to break down amino acids stored in muscle tissue to kind of keep up with this gluconeogenesis process that these two molecules are promoting. So we're not just breaking down body fat and stored glycogen, but we're also breaking down the stored amino acids, and the biggest pool and storage unit of amino acids are the muscles. And then in response to all these molecules in the bloodstream, we will have an even greater increase in insulin. And this will increase the amount of nutrients that we store. And this isn't selective, so yes, a lot of these nutrients will be stored into our fat tissue. Additionally, the more insulin that we produce over time, the more likely we are to begin to develop insulin signaling issues where we get what is oftentimes called insulin resistant. And I've done an entire podcast episode on that in the past. So it appears that what the dawn phenomenon does is perfectly normal, but if we double down on this with caffeine, we can have the negative effects that come with high stress and high blood sugar. Additionally, we simply have to use more caffeine. So if we have caffeine directly in the morning, the chance that this will last us all day long actually is much more reduced. Therefore, we're more likely to have to use more caffeine later in the afternoon. And using caffeine in the afternoon to combat that afternoon slump will likely just harm our sleep that night, and then the next morning we'll wake up even more tired and probably have to use more caffeine. Additionally, with caffeine, it really is the less caffeine we can use, the better. And I don't mean use less and feel less energized. I mean use less caffeine and still get the same amount of benefits. And to do this, we would want to try and maintain our caffeine sensitivity as well as possible. And the best way to do this is simply just not to be drinking caffeine. So the less caffeine we can consume, the more sensitive we can be for days where we really need this hit of caffeine to get us going or kick us into that extra gear required for maybe a hard day of work or a special event. It also appears that taking this caffeine and getting this massive cortisol increase directly in the morning will actually cause us to become a little bit more resistant to producing cortisol when we ingest caffeine, which means we may actually get less of the energetic effects that caffeine causes. With that being said, it will still have the tiredness signal dampening effects of inhibiting adenosine from kind of signaling to our brain that we're beginning to become fatigued. However, for some people, if we don't get that immediate boost of energy in the morning, we'll revert to drinking more caffeine later in the day. And if we still continue not to get this boost, we are not getting the energy benefits, but all of the factors that will harm our sleep later in the night are still going to be present. So if you stop getting this large cortisol response to caffeine, you won't really feel much of the effects of caffeine on making you more energized, but you'll still have a difficult time falling asleep because you did ingest caffeine. So with that being said, I think we can kind of strategically time our caffeine to allow this almost natural cup of coffee that our liver and our body provides to us in the morning to at least get us through the first maybe hour or two of the day. And then maybe an hour after waking, drink caffeine, and by the time it's metabolized, the dawn effect will have worn off, and then we have the caffeine present to not really have a gap in energy production between the time that we wake up and the time that the caffeine begins to kick in. Just waiting a little bit longer after you wake up to drink caffeine just makes it a little bit smoother of a transition between getting up and getting your day kick-started, and still allows us to wind down at night when we need to. So I hope this podcast was interesting and helpful, and I hope you took something away from it. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next episode. Have a great day.